Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Mira Pantic. Welcome to the Global Newsroom. In our previous lecture, we talked about India, and today's lecture is going to be on China. So let me share my screen with you. And I'm going to start this PowerPoint presentation. And before I start explaining media in China, I will just share an interesting fact with you. So last time when I delivered a lecture on India, I had this scarf from India, and this time the scarf that I'm wearing is from China. So there is a reason for my outfit. So let's start with a brief overview of Asia before we proceed to China. Asia includes 50 countries and territories, and it is comprised of 5 subregions: Central Asia, Eastern Asia, Southern Asia, Southeastern Asia, and Western Asia. One of the things that we know about Asia is that most of the countries are developing, and most of the countries also struggle with media freedoms. Now let's take a look at China. The capital of the country is Beijing, and its population is 1.41 billion. What is the most populous country in the world? China is the most populous country in the world. But what do we expect to see in 2028? From the previous lecture, in 2028, India is supposed to take this place, and then China will be the second most populous country in the world. In China, they speak multiple languages, and one of the most prominent and widely spoken languages is Mandarin Chinese. But there are several other languages that you can see on this list. Life expectancy in China is evidently longer than in India. It is 74 years for men and 79 for women. Now, official name of the country of China is People's Republic of China. As I mentioned, it is the most populous country in the world, and China is a socialist republic governed by the Chinese Communist Party. The president of China is Xi Jinping, who has been the president for 10 years, since 2013. He is also the country's leader, basically, as he occupies several other positions, including General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. What do we know about the media system in China? Almost all the media in China are owned by the government. What does it mean? It means that the media are in the hands of the government, so there is no press freedom in China. It is difficult for people to obtain information that is independent because everything they read and see is controlled by the government. For this reason, all media are subject to censorship. The government officially, on the paper, accepts press freedoms. But the thing is that the Constitution includes certain situations in which these freedoms can be restricted. And because of these elements of the Constitution, government can censor all the media in China. Media are encouraged to be economically independent, but not politically independent. Some foreign media are allowed in the country, but foreign journalists risk harassment and even expulsion if their reports are seen as unfavorable to the regime. And this is a big problem because if you come from a country that embraces media freedom, that is fully democratic, and you are adjusted to operate as a journalist under certain rules that allow you to report whatever you can, to report on a vast array of issues. And then you go to China, and all of a sudden you feel that you are restricted in a way as a foreign journalist, because if your reports are negative, then you risk expulsion, because the government will not like what you reported. So even foreign journalists face certain problems in China. But when it comes to local journalists, the main problem is that they cannot report independently on whatever they see or comes to their mind, because all the media in China are controlled by the government. And also they face so much limitation to sources of information. Let's take a look at journalism practice in China. China is one of the most censored countries in the world. There is limited access to foreign news, and this limited access is reflected in rebroadcasting restrictions and even blocking websites with the filtering system that is known as the Great Firewall. So imagine, even as a journalist working there, you constantly face limitations because we are exposed to this diversity of information in the United States, but then looking into other countries, journalists there deal with the limited access to information as their governments block certain websites. So this digital repository that is available to us is not available to them. Another interesting fact is, to practice journalism in China, journalists need to pass a national accreditation exam. And the biggest problem is that along with Turkey, China is a world leader in not a very good thing, and that is in putting journalists in prison. So in 1 year, from December 2022 to 2023, China jailed 43 journalists, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And I will just remind you that when coronavirus pandemic started in China, you remember that we actually, people in China, but also the rest of the world, was faced this lack of information. So we didn't really know what was going on. And this is why we frequently hear from the rest of the world how China is to blame for the spread of the pandemic, because they were suppressing information. So through the COVID-19 pandemic example, you can see how dangerous it is when journalists are not allowed to report on the information they find, discover, and you can see all the issues brought up by censorship. And there are many countries in the world that unfortunately followed the example of China, because they were suppressing information about the number of people infected by COVID-19, as they didn't know how to handle the situation. So you can read more about COVID-19 pandemic in China and how it tackled the issues and this issue, and how it suppressed information. So the rest of the world really wasn't aware of the severity of the pandemic and the virus. Let's take a look at the media in China. China is the largest media market in the world. China Daily is an English daily newspaper, and this newspaper is available in the United States because this newspaper has branch offices in New York City and Washington, D.C. So people Chinese who live in the US and want to learn about what is happening in their country can inform themselves through this newspaper, and of course through many other sources that are available to them online. So one of the most well-known news organizations in the world is Xinhua. It is the national Chinese agency. So just like we have in the United States Associated Press, the United Kingdom has Reuters, France has AFP agency, China has its own news agency, and the name of that agency is Xinhua. CNC World is another media organization. It is an English language television channel, and this channel is owned by the Chinese news agency. 51% of the ownership is Chinese news agency Xinhua, and private investors own 49%. CCTV in China is a state-owned broadcaster that is expanding overseas with broadcast in multiple languages, including English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Japanese. Now, these numbers are really high. Just look at them, but we're talking about the most populous country in the world. So no wonder that they have thousands of TV channels. So they currently have about 3,300 TV channels, 2,600 radio stations, and they have 1,900 newspapers, not to mention the endless number of digital sources that Chinese can access to obtain information. But again, the information they can obtain through these sources is limited, or it is controlled by the government. Let's take a look at the Communist Party and its impact on journalism. As I mentioned, China is a socialist country, and the ruling party is the Communist Party. The Communist Party controls the media. How do they control the media? And how do they put journalists in prison? Almost anything can be declared a state secret. And if something gets declared a state secret and you report on it, you can end up in prison. So this is one of the ways for them to put journalists in prisons. The top requirement for journalists is to propagate and carry the party's principle and policies. So is this really journalism? You remember when we learn about American journalism and all the principles that are relevant to us that make journalism, it is not just about creating information, reporting on events and issues and delivering that information to your audience. It's not only about that, it is about delivering the truth. So if you're being controlled, if you're being censored, you're really limited in truth delivering. And also, you need to be accurate about the event, transparent. You need to exercise independence. So one of the key elements in our journalism is objectivity and independence. But looking into journalism that is being performed in China, it really serves more as propaganda, because journalists need to make sure that their reports align with the Communist Party principles and policies. So if they align with the Communist Party's principle and policies, can we call this journalism independent? Can we call just journalism objective? Hardly. So this is one of the major issues. They still call it journalism, but it's very different from journalism that is being performed in the democratic world. Journalists serve the ruling Chinese Communist Party, and their work is being censored and policed. Only a few media will report on corruption. Again, you can take a look at what was going on during the COVID pandemic, and you will see what kind of challenges journalists faced in reporting on the pandemic. When it comes to television, it reaches about 95% of the population. And in the TV media in China, entertainment dominates. News occupies about 12% of airtime. Now, remember, we covered this state television, CCTV. So an interesting fact about CCTV is that all stations must carry its 30-minute newscast at 7 p.m. So they are required to carry the CCTV's newscast. What are some other media that are present in China? These media include newspapers. Newspapers, just like other media, are directly owned by the government. Only about a quarter of magazines in China are profitable. Other magazines are simply party publications that government officers need to subscribe to. So it's mandatory, basically, for them to subscribe to these magazines, and they're just constantly just receiving this information from the Communist Party that keeps them loyal to the party. Tabloids are very popular in China, and radio, as radio reaches more than 95% of the population, just like television. The internet and smartphones. What do we know about the internet use in China? The Chinese authorities have been very aggressive in their efforts to block websites they consider unfriendly. So they don't allow any criticism. And again, this is why China is at the bottom of World Press Freedom Index. And the only country that it's at the bottom, and the country that is really at the bottom is North Korea. Despite their efforts, Chinese authorities find it impossible to monitor all the websites. So, but regardless, the Communist Party wants to control the internet as well as other media in China. There are also millions of bloggers in China that try to annoy the government, but again, it is very difficult to share any independent articles, independent opinion in China, because the Chinese government literally monitors everything and makes sure that there are no words that are being spread that express any form of criticism against the government and the ruling party. Now, let's take a look at the share of the internet users of the leading social media in China as of third quarter of 2022. And this is a graph from Statista website, which is a very relevant source to look into for social media and internet use and other statistics across the globe. So the most popular platform is WeChat, and WeChat is basically similar to WhatsApp. It's a Chinese version of WhatsApp. But just take a look at other social media. You don't see American social media on the list. It is because they have their own social media, and their own social media, they can control their own social media. So you can see all these Chinese platforms that are available. And when we look at the share of internet users of the leading social media in China, WeChat definitely takes spot number 81.6% of the population uses it. So it's a very popular platform. So 81.6% of the internet population. And then it's followed by other platforms. So, and again, to go back, and again, to take a look at the World Press Freedom Index, as I mentioned, China is always at the bottom of the list. You see, out of 180 countries, the only country behind China is North Korea. So China occupies place number 179. So it's at the bottom of the list. So you can see from this, from the World Press Freedom Index, what kind of challenges journalists in China deal with, because press freedom basically doesn't exist. So in Western terms, it is even difficult to call journalism what they are able to perform, because it's not their fault. They're just limited. They risk ended up in prison if they write something against the government. And also everything in China, again, is fully controlled by the Communist Party. So what is the conclusion? And we will talk about some other interesting facts about media in China in class. But what is the conclusion? Do you expect that anything would change? They've had the same president for 10 years. Media freedoms have been suppressed for decades. So there's really a little chance of any revolutionary change in China. But there are some journalists who are ready to risk and write about sensitive issues, including corruption. Most Chinese accept the Communist Party's control because of the growing power and economic success of the country. So this is why they accept politics, because if they're content with the economy, they're less likely to be worried about politics. Media will remain under the strict control of the government, and that is what can be expected in the future. So What did we learn from this brief lecture about China that we will expand in class? First of all, Communist Party controls the flow of information. So it doesn't just control the media, but it controls websites. So that includes blogs, citizen websites, whatever other information coming from abroad. So that includes blocking foreign websites. So they inspect everything, all the content that people might be exposed to in China. All media and social networks are being censored, and foreign journalists, even foreign journalists, not just local journalists, but foreign journalists risk harassment if their reports are being seen as unfavorable to the regime. Local journalists list being put in prison for their reporting. And again, when it comes to internet use, China is leading. Entertainment is very popular, tabloids are popular, but when it comes to news, they're predominantly being controlled by the Communist Party. So this was a brief lecture on China, and I have an exercise for you that you need to complete before we meet in class. Search for information online about censorship in China. Look at which social media networks have the Chinese government banned in the country. So there are multiple social media networks that are US-based and they're banned in China. I want you to search for information online. Please look at relevant sources. Again, if you go to Wikipedia, just make sure to scroll down to look at the list of references and go to the original sources. Or Google information, look for relevant news websites or YouTube channels where you can search for more information about censorship in China, and then explain what kind of implications do you think that censorship of both the media and social networks has on the society in China. One thing also that you can do, you'll see that as soon as China bans something like a website or a social media platform, it is news media in the US report on it. So you can also search for relevant news sources for information about social media networks that Chinese government has banned. Your essay should have about 300 words, and then please post your essay under censorship in China. At the bottom of your essay, make sure to include links to your sources. Okay, this is my reference list. So please, for more information about China, go to Committee to Protect Journalists website, read the textbook, and also I provided links to the BBC and their description of Chinese media and China country profile. Also, there is a link to Statista website where you can learn more about a share of internet users of the leading social media in China. Thank you very much for your time and patience and your attention. If you have any questions, just send me an email or find me on Twitter. And that was all that I had for you for today. Have a nice day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.